Do you love traveling and love photography? If so, you're going to enjoy this interview with Art Wolfe, a world famous photographer who's traveled the world. Let's do this interview and hear his story. All right, hello, welcome to Photography TV. We're here to educate, entertain, and inspire you around photography. Today, I am thrilled to bring Art Wolfe on the show. Art's tagline is explore, create, and inspire. We're going to do all three of those things today. Art, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Paul. I'm really happy to be here.
Yeah, we are enthused to have you here. So, Art, I always start every interview off with just a simple question. Tell us your story.
Well, I grew up 1 mile from where I'm sitting right now, so I'm very home-centric. I've got friends that go back to when I was 5 years old, and yet I travel the world. And so for me, it's important to have those kind of roots. Yes. I live in a fabulous old house built in 1910 that I've redone and remodeled, but it's still got the same old bones. My background's painting and art. I graduated from the University of Washington in 1977 with degrees in painting and art education. And yet while I was at college, I got into climbing big time and started taking cameras along to document those climbs. And then by the time I graduated from the art school, my allegiances had shifted to photography because I found it so much easier to create original compositions through the photographic medium than sitting there and staring at a blank canvas and trying to conjure up a new composition.
That totally makes sense. Yeah. So you mentioned travel. I've just followed your story online, your shows, things like that. And I'd say your life is like my bucket list. So just from a travel perspective, how many countries have you visited in your lifetime?
You know, I don't collect countries like some people do that They will travel in 2 days, they travel somewhere else. So I didn't even know, but I had my staff really look it up last year. And as of last year, I had traveled to 65 countries.
Wow.
And you know, for a person that really travels to boast about it, you know, they'll have traveled probably to all the world's countries. But I've gone back to China 15 times and Japan 15 times. So I go back to places that deliver really great opportunities. India 15 times. So much of my travel is going back to places and exploring the intricacies of the countries like India. And in India, there's so many dialects, so many religions, so many little microclimates that I have just touched the surface.
Yeah. Oh, I can only imagine. We're going to talk extensively about photography, but let's drill in on travel just a moment. Tell us a story from your travels that perhaps you haven't told in a while.
Oh my God. I mean, just last year, and I'm 66. A lot of my friends are grandfathers. And when I get together with my friends that I've known since we were 5 years old, about every 6 months. And they're talking about their grandchildren and all that. And I'm talking about getting flesh-eating viruses, which I picked up in Chad in April. I was charged by an elephant in October. I had a bear in July, and I shouldn't really say it because I'm leading bear tours, but we had a bear come right up behind me, and I was alone out on the tundra. And I was it was a windy day, and I was, focused on my assistant, Gabrielle Jacon, and our participants. And a 600-pound brown bear came up and put his nose right in the small of my back. And I had nothing. I had no bear spray. I had no weapons. Didn't even have a tripod because these days, as we bounce up at the ISOs, the tripods become less and less necessary on every outing. But I know bears, and I knew that this was a 3-year-old, and we call these guys, they're like teenagers, hooligans. And so they get into trouble, and this one was just testing me, but he really broke that invisible boundary that most animals maintain. And he just came right up to me, and I took a step back, and he took a step forward. And then I thought, oh my God, now what do I do? And so I reached down into my lungs and really yelled at him and took my pack off and put it right into his face. And I was able to back him up a couple of steps. I had to get physical and touch him. And over a span of about what seemed like 5 minutes, it could have taken 3 minutes. I was able to kind of back him down over the bank of a river. And then I ran about 30 feet and stopped and turned around. And as I expected, he was back up on the bank. But by that time, that 30 feet, I was able to walk backwards slowly. And was able to break that kind of interest in me. So that's a story that I've not really told beyond my friends, but it happened. I think this year when I lead tours up there, I may put some pepper spray in my pack, and the pepper spray would have been a good thing because it would have taught that bear boundaries. And many of these bears have grown up as cubs, seeing fishermen in the river and photographers. And so that, he was so familiar with people that it was like a dog coming up to sniff you. And with a bear, if he starts to play with you, you're dead. The claws are 3 inches long. It's, if a Rottweiler is a challenge at 100 pounds, you can imagine something 6 times the size.
Absolutely.
So it was a new experience for me.
Oh, I'm sure. This is something I was probably going to ask a little bit about later, but the way that I found you, Art, was the Netflix show Tales by Light. I love that show. You were on there a couple of times, I believe. The episode that just amazed me had to do with bears. I think you were in Alaska. You were surrounded by grizzlies. Tell me about that experience.
Okay, so, I have grown up as a photographer. The first assignment I ever got was up on Kodiak Island in 1978, and I was doing an article for Alaska. It's called Alaska Magazine. And I was right in the heart of the biggest bear country on earth. I have never visualized myself ever being killed by a wild animal. And so I don't go in there with fear or intrepidation. I just kind of go in there with, this is an opportunity. I'm going to be confident. And so over the years, I've become an expert on bears. And yet, as you just heard, Nobody's the perfect expert. And so I love to take people that have maybe read Alaskan Bear Tales, and they have this fear. The worst thing in their mind could ever be caught out in a forest and a bear comes up, because they've read all these bear tales. Many are grizzly, but taken over a very long period of time. The likelihood really of getting into trouble with a bear, as I just evidenced, is fairly remote, because I've been up in that area a lot. I love to take people out and take them fairly close to bears. We have to respect a certain distance, but if a bear's coming your way, we don't run away. We just stand there and wait for them to pass. And sometimes a mother with cubs will come within 12 feet of you. Wow. And that is very short distance when you see the scale and the size of it. And people are just watching me and watching my behavior, and I'm just watching, and the bear knows who we are. They've really grown up watching fly fishermen for the longest time, and then now photographers are kind of filtering into that environment.
Yeah,
it's great. A mother with cubs, the cubs are very animated, and at the time of the year that we generally go up there is at the end of July and early August, when the sockeye salmon, which are brilliant red, are running, and it's just such a perfect dynamic to photograph these great creatures.
Yeah, your pictures during that episode, and I've seen online, were incredible. Just the perspectives and the shots, that I was really impressed.
It never gets old.
Yeah.
Seriously, it never gets old. Every time I go up there, I'm so excited to go out on another day. And so, we land at a remote little lake on a plane that's got pontoons. We walk about 15 minutes to the river's edge, and then we go up and down the river. And at that time of the year there, you could, on an average day, you could easily see 50, 60 bears.
Wow. Yeah, I saw it through your eyes, and it looked incredible.
They remind me of dogs, these big brown bears. They've got long snouts. The inland grizzly, which is very closely related to these guys, only smaller, they have short snouts. But the ones that are salmon fishermen evolved long noses for being underwater, and they look like dogs. They have that kind of behavior and expressions as a dog. So there's a connection there that is irrefutable, actually.
That's fantastic. Let's shift back to travel if we could.
Okay.
You're world traveled yourself. Tell us a location that perhaps could be drastically different in 10 years that if we wanted to prioritize going to now would be a good thing to do?
Any of the areas that border the Arctic would be a good place to see. If you're wanting to see what the Arctic was like, if people that are listening here find their way to Svalbard, that's a archipelago of islands north of Norway, and there's actually several tour companies that take people through these islands. And these islands have polar bear and walrus, foxes, muskox, glaciers. It's quite a place to go. But it's changing. It won't be long. Certainly within the next, I would say, within the next 10 years, the Arctic ice, even on a cold year, will not extend south to touch these islands, which is how the polar bears get on the islands. And I was there last year. I was there the year before. And the polar bears for survival, are starting to get into bird colonies. They're eating other things than the typical ring seal that is their primary diet. So they're trying to evolve. But in reality, I believe the polar bear will become invisible. In other words, they are going to morph back into the brown bears that they used to be before the last ice age began. And so they will no longer be white. And in fact, there's already evidence that they're breeding with brown bears up on the Arctic coast of Alaska. So that's what will eventually happen is polar bears are going to go away. There's no doubt about it. It's just inevitable. And they will reemerge sometime, 10,000 years from now if bears are still around. So that's what I believe.
Wow. No, thank you for that.
But there are to answer that question, on a cultural point of view, everything's changing with the inevitable creep of Western civilization. And so you have to go further into the bush now to discover things that I was able to discover 25, 30 years ago. Now I have to go back to those places, but go further into the remote areas because people love communications. They love technology. They want everything that we have. And in many ways, some of the countries like China and India leapfrogged past us when it comes to cell phones and cell towers, where in America we have landlines that are pretty much an obstacle because you and I have been places where we can't get phone coverage, and we're not that far from Dallas or Seattle.
That's right.
In India, you could be in the heart of a jungle, or in China in the heart of the mountains, and they nonchalantly pick up a phone and they can reach Beijing or Delhi without even missing a beat. It's because there's so many towers, and that's the way it is. So, we are a first world country, but in many ways we're behind now other places that have embraced and love technology, and that then breaks down the customs, the cultures. And that's, in fact, Paul, my biggest fear, that one day we'll wake up and everything will be, familiar stores, familiar food, and it'll just become homogenized. So I don't know. It just seems like that's the way the world's going.
That was the heart of my question. Obviously, you took it in two different perspectives, which was brilliant. But on the cultural aspect, I can totally see that evolving. And I would like to ask a follow-up on that for someone that doesn't travel as much, how could we go about creating a unique cultural experience where we may just not have the expertise or knowledge or connections to go deeper into the bush? Or what advice would you give someone to try to create that unique cultural experience today?
Well, virtually China, Southeast Asia, Australia. Are we talking about if people could save up and go one place?
However you want to take it.
Even on our own land.
However you want to answer.
Well, we have right next to us Mexico. And as you indicated, and I agree prior to this interview, Mexico is a great place to go. And there's a lot of different cultures within Mexico. There's a lot of First Nations that existed prior to the Spaniards coming. And if people did their research for not that much money, they could go and explore a country that Europeans die to go to, but it's just south of our border. To have a truly unique cultural experience, people should get on the internet and spend some time Googling areas of Mexico and finding where there's pockets of traditions. Like in early November, they have the Day of the Dead ceremony that exists in Oaxaca, but also in Pátzcuaro, which is a town southwest of Mexico City. And that is as good as it gets because they are celebrating their deceased loved ones, but they do it in such a positive way. They decorate the cemeteries and people dress up like skeletons. They bring food, they light candles, and it's very, very primordial experience. And it doesn't cost a lot of money. And when I was down in Mexico just in early December, I walked everywhere in Mexico City without any fear or intrepidation. And, people should go.
That's great. I love the way you took the answer, too. If you don't have to travel across the world for something.
That's right.
Regardless of where you live, there probably is something relatively close if you just look a
Well,
little
and
deeper.
to take that kind of thought one step new, I'm teaching a series of workshops around the country called Photography as Art. And I'm like people like me have gone into degraded environments, into the shadowy areas of cities around the world and photograph the abandoned, the things that have been left behind and finding really beautiful abstracts and textures and colors. And then I compare them to abstract expressionism that flourished in America at the midpoint of last century. And people are hard pressed to tell Jackson Pollock from something I photographed in an old abandoned car or something like that. And I love doing that because if people are into photography, they can walk down the street. There's places in Dallas, there's places in virtually any city where they live, and it's all about the mental and opening up your imagination and, sensitizing the eye for looking for things that they never would have considered. And so I say, whether you're rich or poor, you still can be a photographer. You just have to have the imagination.
Absolutely. The creativity, which you clearly have. Let's shift it now to do some photography, just tips and thoughts from your perspective. So what's a common mistake that a lot of photographers make when traveling and trying to capture images?
Well, I don't know if it's so much a mistake than something that's just inevitable for people. Okay. And, they see pictures of a place and they've got to go and shoot the same thing. And, yes. I think it's just a rites of passage. It's almost something you've got to get out of your system. Some people never grow out of that and never create their original vision or push themselves that way. They're just happy to have their version of something that's been shot 10,000 times.
Yes.
And so that, to me, is the pitfall of being exuberant about photography, but they are copying what's been copied, that's been copied, that's been copied. I want people to be creative and imaginative. And that's not synonymous with just shooting the same old, same old.
That's fantastic. I agree. And I've been guilty of that, going to Yosemite,
we all are.
going to tunnel view and just taking the same shot.
Oh, when I was first starting out, I would go to drugstores and look at postcards and do the same thing. But that was the starting point. And I say, go and do that and learn your technique and all that, but then branch out.
Yeah.
Expose yourself to art and history and, dig deep. And when you do that, you'll come up with something that's fresh and new. And it's so much more rewarding than just having a portfolio of the same recognizable, viewpoints.
Yep, that's great. To continue on that theme of challenging yourself to do something different, stand out, be unique, if you were giving advice to someone younger today that wants to try to follow in your footsteps, be a traveler, be a photographer in today's day and age, it's challenging. What advice would you give them to try to follow in your footsteps?
I think that photography is evolving fast, just like everything else. It's becoming more and more sophisticated. We have devices to put cameras in angles and viewpoints that we didn't even think about before. Along those lines, cameras are evolving so that we can use higher ISOs, which opened up the whole repertoire of nighttime photography in a much better way. So I think, and what I say, this is a great time to become a photographer.
Great.
Because you now have tools that we weren't even exposed to. When I first started out, as a wildlife photographer, I was using ISO 25. If I was a wildlife photographer using ISO 25, the animal had to be dead before you get it in focus. So, now we can catch, animals in flight and doing things that your eye can't even see.
Yes.
And so I'm very encouraging for people. It's not all been done. I think we've scratched the surface, and I'm pushing myself in many different directions because I never want to sit on my laurels and think, okay, I've done it all. No, I work 7 days a week. I'm very thrilled about taking pictures. It's not it's not a hobby. It's not even a profession. It's life. It's just the way you live your life. And some people, a lot of people would love to justify taking pictures by selling their images, and that's fine. But I ask them, why do you want to do that? I mean, you've made your money. You're a retired doctor. You're a lawyer. You're whatever. You've got your money. Why do you need to justify selling an image? Because once you start to go down the path of making money, it brings stress and less happiness to you. So I think the most important thing is, are you a happier person creating images? Yes. And if the answer is yes, leave it at that, because making money from it doesn't make you a better photographer. May make you a better businessman, but keep to photography and keep it happy and enrich your life. I sound like a what's the word? Evangelist, and I am. But that's what I believe. I think that if you're creating, you're happier. And if you're happier, the people around you are probably happier because of your happiness. So that's a very positive way to look at photography.
Yep. And keep that passion, keep creating, and then people take notice, and it creates the opportunities behind it. It's wonderful.
Yeah. And notice that word, the word inspire was the third word in that line. And by intent, because I take pictures for my audience. You have this show that I'm on because you want to educate and inspire other people. I think it's why musicians play music, cooks cook, dancers dance, and photographers take pictures. It's not just for our own selves, but we want to share what we have found and, inspire people.
Yep, I totally agree, Art. In fact, it's a nice transition. If you notice right behind me, I've got your book, which I have to say, I obviously was familiar with your book. I was looking at it online. When I picked it up and bought the copy, it can't do it justice online how nice and big this book is. This is, I think, 350 color pages. Allow me to just promote it for a second for you. It's incredible. I mean, it must weigh like 8 pounds. So
it's a big book. It's a boat anchor.
It sure is. And it just can't do it justice online. So anyone watching, take a look at this book. I think if you do pick it up, you'll be very impressed. But tell us a little bit about the book, if you could, Art, from your perspective.
Actually, I'll tell you, this is a revised edition because 2 years ago we brought out a bigger book. Same book, different cover. And that then got published in Germany and in France. And then because that market, which was a $95 book, we recaptured an audience for a cheaper book, but it's still substantial. And so I'm working with a publisher out of San Rafael, California, and we've got 8 books lined up for the next 7 years, and they're all about that size. Wow. So my feeling is, as long as you've got a project like a book, and I've got 8, there's a reason to get out of bed. I'm great. Totally motivated by the books, not by money or anything else. The books kind of say, okay, you got to get your ass out of bed. You can edit that.
No, it's fine.
Get out of bed and get to work. And I love doing that. And so books or presentations, I have to have a project. I can't just go out and shoot left and right without any connection. I have to be focused. Yes. And then my other belief is, as long as you have a project to work on, you're never going to die, because you can't die in the middle of a project. Right. So, playing mind games is what we're talking about.
It's that goal too. You use the word purpose, and it's so true that when you have that goal, you have that purpose. It gets you up in the morning and keeps you going. Yeah, that's fantastic.
I mean, it's not lost on me that people in America, men that retire, historically would die 11 months after retirement. Wow. And now we're doing a little better. The average man is living 18 months after retirement. And what that speaks to is they've not properly prepared for retirement. They don't have hobbies or passion. The word is passion. Yep. They may live to do a golf game or whatever, and then they do it in the first couple of months, and they sit and become sedentary, and they go away fast. And so I think passion is a word that's critical. And I'm an advocate of photography, but I'm also more importantly an advocate of creativity. And that spans all those different disciplines,
Yes.
writing, dance, gardening, whatever it may be, but have a passion in doing what you're doing.
Yes.
And that keeps the heart moving and the brain engaged. And longevity is something I believe we should all ascribe to, because we only have one shot on this planet. Why not live it to the fullest?
That's the truth. Oh, Art, you're inspiring me just hearing your perspective on it. I totally agree. And
Well, old people like me, we accrue some sort of wisdom with time.
You've got it. You've got it. All right. So coming back here to the book, Earth is My Witness. From what I can tell, it's a chronicle of your travels over the years. One that I wanted to ask you about, which there's 1,000 pictures in here, but one that really stood out to me, see if I can back it up.
Yeah.
Was this one. And it's obviously brilliantly composed, but just I'd love to hear, what is this in the background? Tell us the story behind this one. I just picked this one.
I've never said this before, but a good friend of mine, Galen Rowell, I was in his office the day he got slides back from Tibet where he had aligned a rainbow over the Potala Palace. And he was so excited, and he told me the story and then later wrote about it, that he had to run a mile across an open field because he saw the rainbow, and he knew that had he run up the field, he could align the palace with the rainbow. And that is exactly what happened there. Wow. What you're looking at in the background is one of the amazing sand dunes in Namibia, where each sand crystal is orange, and then late in the day it just glows orange.
Yep.
And then you see the dark shadow of the shadowed area of the sand dune. But that Bisa oryx, or what they call gemsbuck, was fairly detached from the backdrop. And so I ran up a dirt road within a national park down there and aligned it up so that the convergence of lines worked. And that's how I got that shot.
That's great. I love that shot.
It's pre-visualizing what you can do. And then later, and then I put also on a 70 to 200. I used a polarizer. So I compressed the image. So it created the illusion that the sand dune was rising directly above the Gemza, but they were fairly far apart. But that compression is what made it happen.
Yes, terrific.
Every photo has a story.
I love that tagline. I totally agree with that. I could pick many more, but obviously that's what the book is for. Let me ask this, though, because this book has a lot of images in it, but I can't even imagine the number of images that you've taken over your lifetime. How do you narrow down, if you come back from a trip, and I typically might have 1,000, 1,500 images, how do you start to narrow those down and really select the ones that stand out when you probably have, from your perspective, a lot of really good shots? How do you find that higher, that best image?
Okay, so here's the story. I'll just take as an example, I was in Zimbabwe in October.
Okay.
Every day that I would go out on safari, I would shoot probably on average 2,000 photos.
Wow.
Okay. So every day on a 12-day trip, I would shoot. So that's 24,000 photos. By the time I land in Seattle, it's been winnowed down to about 3,000.
Okay.
So I am brutal. I am totally brutal because I keep on throwing money in archiving software, and we keep on spending money. And it's far easier for me to edit decisively than just to buy more and more storage devices. Right. So I do that. And, with time, you just become decisive. Do you need 20 of the same thing? No, you need one or possibly two.
Right.
So I spend the time on long haul flights across the Atlantic, up from Africa to Europe and Europe to Seattle, editing and getting rid of all the stuff.
Okay.
And once I make the decision, I never look backwards or regret. And so when I walk in the door in my office, we have 3,000 photos rather than 24,000.
That's a big difference.
That takes time and experience. And I'm at, I hope, the best of what I can do. And so I make those decisions and I never regret. I have a seasoned eye, experienced eye. So I can tell. And, when you're photographing wildlife, invariably and always, there's one instant that's going to be the best. The alignment of animals and so forth and so on. And you get that. And then you get a good sister of that. But why do I need 15 or 20 more? So I just let go.
There you go. So be comfortable letting it go.
Yeah.
Well, good. Art, I've taken enough of your time. This is absolutely brilliant. Again, the book, Earth is My Witness, I'm a big fan of it. I encourage people to check it out. Your tagline, explore, create, inspire. You talked about all three of those things today. We really appreciate you coming on the show. Art, thanks for joining us.
Have me back, okay, in the future.
I'd love to.
All right, Paul. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Art.